and we can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. My name is Drea. I am the Learning Coordinator here at the North Bend Public Library in beautiful, rainy coastal Oregon. And today we have a presentation for Banned Books Week. Comic books, libraries, and you. Comic books, banned books, libraries, and you. And we have two panelists with us today. Admit a couple more people. And our panelists are Miranda Doyle, District Librarian at Lake Oswego School District. She is also a member of the Oregon Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee, and she is the Intellectual Freedom Advocate for, all right, going to ask people to mute if possible. She is also the Intellectual Freedom Advocate for the Oregon Association of School Libraries, and she will be interviewing Jordan. Where did you go? There's our information.
Right
Jordan
here,
Smith.
right
You're right there. Yes, thank you. Jordan Smith. He is the editor at the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. He's served on many panels discussing the upsurge of book bans and emerging trends, the current situation, and both in schools and in libraries. And we're just very excited to have him here. So when we decided for a Banned Books Week what we were going to be doing, I pushed for comic books because about 10 years ago, there a book came out, the 10-Cent Plague, which talked about the history of comic books in America. It's a fascinating book, is one fraught with clutched pearls and emotions about how comic books are bringing down our youth. And well, oh, why look, you happen to have a copy of it there. While all over the world, comic books are just seen as a book. And so this is something that's interested me for quite a while. And it's also something where I keep thinking, why is there a comic book legal defense fund? Comic books. And then I remember, oh, right, 10-Cent Plague, and it's been continuing. And with the upswing in book bans and challenges, comic books are certainly among the injured. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Miranda and Jordan, and you may start. Thanks so much, both of you, for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah,
excited to be here and hear the answers. So Jordan, can you tell us a little bit about what you and the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund do, and your purpose?
Sure. So we are a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization. Basically, we work to protect the First Amendment rights and free speech rights of the comics community. So that includes retailers, creators, publishers, librarians, educators, fans. So we're basically keeping an eye about looking at the rights. We're starting to do a little bit more legal work, which is helping creators with rights, helping creators with contracts, helping retailers with leases, stuff like that, some of the legal documents. But it's interesting because our work has changed a lot over the years. The organization originally started in 1986. An undercover police officer arrested a comics retailer for selling comic books that today you can find them in comic stores. They're basically just adult comics. One of them, probably the most famous that's still around, is Heavy Metal Magazine. So this undercover cop arrested the retailer for obscenity charges for selling these comic books. So a publisher and cartoonist, Dennis Kitchen, got the comics community together, raised money to protect and pay for the legal fees. And then with all the money that was left over, use that to seed and start the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. So for years and years, a lot of what the fund did was protect retailers and comic book fans from being arrested on obscenity charges and stuff like that. But what we've been seeing, especially in the last 5 years and very extremely in the last 2 years, is a lot of censorship in schools and libraries. So a lot of our work has sort of been transitioning from this focus on protecting retailers to working with educators and working with librarians to make sure we can keep books in schools and libraries.
Great, thank you. And I have a lot of questions about intellectual freedom in general and the laws that protect it, but something happened recently in Virginia that you were involved with, or your group was, and
Yeah.
some people here may be familiar, but if you could recap and tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, definitely. In Virginia Beach, there was an obscenity charge against two books. One of them was the graphic novel Genderqueer, a memoir by Maya Kobabe. The other was a Sarah J. Maas novel, not a comic, but we had the opportunity to represent Maya in court defending the book. So our not everyone in the organization is a lawyer, but our interim director happens to be a lawyer. So he ended up being Maya's co-counsel with Stephen Emmert. Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was a great victory. Basically, the judge was able to throw the obscenity charges out. There's been a little bit of misreporting on the case. The hope was that the judge would rule that the work was not obscene, but the case had enough holes in it and enough issues that it was thrown out before it came to that point. Basically, it was filed under a Virginia law that sort of allows one party to press charges without all of the other party knowing or being able to defend themselves in court. So the judge sort of declared that unconstitutional and was able to throw out the whole case because of that. There was also an issue with the way in which the graphic novel was presented as being obscene. The judge felt like there wasn't enough proof that this could be an obscene work. There was a certain amount of like images taken out of context. It was something like, so many pages of the book, which ended up being, 2% of the book is considered obscene, which if you look at the Miller test, that's not a substantial enough chunk of a piece of literature to point that that's the main purpose of this book, is to be obscene. So there's these kind of like technical smaller reasons why it was thrown out, but yeah, it was a great victory in Virginia Beach, and we're really happy that we were able to be involved with that. We're really happy we were able to represent Maya and a really great book.
Great, thank you. It's pretty exciting to have some good news in these times, because there's a lot of bad news and legislation and things that are happening. Let's see. Can we go back and just define some of the terms? For example, what does it mean to ban a book? I'll hear students or people say, how could that be a banned book? I can get that at the bookstore or elsewhere.
Yeah, definitely. So banned books, it is a little bit tricky. There's the whole mix up sometimes of a challenged book versus a banned book. Banned books are books that you may be able to access them in certain areas, like you mentioned, maybe like say a library bans a book. They say, we're not going to carry this book anymore. And someone can say, well, I'm going to, I can still buy this on like Amazon, something like that. And that's been a huge argument that one side has had, is we're not censoring this book. You can still buy it on Amazon. And that brings up the whole issue with access, the access to information. Is there's this assumption that everyone can safely read books where they live. There's an assumption that people can afford to buy books. There's an assumption that people can afford to pay for shipping. And so banning it from one of the avenues where it is accessible to portions of the community is the same thing as censorship for the most part. So a lot of times when people talk about bans, it might just be banned from libraries or schools, but it's still a form of censorship.
Thank you. And I think we've kind of moved, this is Banned Books Week, but we have tried to also say we're celebrating the freedom to read. We're not celebrating banned books. We're talking about access, exactly. And in school libraries, I feel like it's especially important because that is the place that students are every school day. And they have transportation to school, and they're able to be there. And if the book isn't there in the school library, they may never encounter it. So, okay, so what are some of the laws, and just generally, that protect books in public libraries and in public schools? And also, do minors have any rights to read what they want?
Yes, this is a really good and complex question. I know that you and some of the other librarians will know a lot more about this than I do, but it's definitely something that needs to be broken down. There's a difference between public libraries and public schools. And then once you break it down and start looking at schools, there's a difference between public schools and private schools. And then there's also a difference between schools that are K through 12 and higher education. So they all have sort of different rules and regulations. Basically with public libraries, and this is something where please jump in if I say anything wrong, but public libraries are paid for by the public, and they are supposed to have free access to information to multiple points of view. There's not supposed to be any agenda or anything like that. It's supposed to be just a neutral space where you can learn. The only reasons to get rid of books are, damaged books where the information isn't applicable anymore, or books that just aren't being circulated. No one's checking them out. So if a book is taken out of a public library because of people don't want others to access that information, or because of personal views of not wanting to present that, or political views, that would be a good indicator of censorship and a breach of First Amendment rights. There's actually a case right now in Llano, Texas, where the community has sued. Several members of the community has sued because a library was going through and they wanted to pull books, and there was a couple of the books they wanted to pull that were on the Overdrive system, the digital book system. And so they took down Overdrive. So it took down the access to thousands of books for the community, just because they were trying to target, a handful of books. So they have, it seems like it's a pretty good case. It's pretty huge to deny access. So that's the public school, or the public libraries. Public schools are a little bit different. Minors do have First Amendment rights. The huge case is the Tinker case, which was basically where we get that phrase, you don't lose your First Amendment rights when you walk through the school gates. So that being said, you do have First Amendment rights. There are several other court cases. We won't get into the nitty gritty, but schools can have a little leeway. It depends on the administration, also depends on the school board as to what types of books are going to be in the school. They have to fit what that community decides are their community standards. So school boards do have a lot of sway over what is in a school library or a classroom library. But it is protected that they can't deny books because of, again, access to information or political viewpoints. It has to be, the books are supposed to be for educational purposes. So there has to be, there should be reasons why these books are at the schools. Yeah, and I guess that's really some of the differences.
Yeah, I would add that for school libraries, we have two different parts. We have the curriculum. So we have books that all students read, although almost every school district says, if you don't want your child to read that particular book, we'll provide an alternative, or we will find another place for them during that particular lesson. And then there's the library collection where, it's independent reading. Students can choose what to pick, what to pick out, what to check out. And so they're not required to read anything. And, we often try to explain not every book is for every reader. When you have, say, a K-8 school, it's not possible that every book would be appropriate for a kindergartner, right? So, but one thing that can be really difficult in school libraries is sometimes it's your boss who wants to remove books, which hopefully in the public library isn't so much of an issue.
Yeah, and hopefully with school libraries as well, there's a lot of policies in place for book reviews, and that brings up the whole thing with book challenges when someone has a complaint about the book. So it's really important to know what your school policies are and make sure that the school policies that are in place are robust and something that can be followed very strictly and have a fair, even look at the books that are being challenged.
Absolutely. And that's something we say over and over again. Check your policies, update your policies, make sure that your district follows them because they've adopted them and they need to follow them. Okay, so in the current climate, who is challenging books and why are they doing it? What would you say your observations have been? How things have changed? You mentioned the last 5 years.
Yeah. So there was a really interesting report. I mean, so a really interesting report was just released on Monday by PEN America. In my personal opinion, they've been releasing a lot of really great material, sort of breaking down the statistics that they have been collecting. But PEN America had a report they released on Monday about who is behind the recent book bans. And they broke it down so it's almost 50% of the book bans that happened over the past year have been backed by advocacy groups. So the way that they broke it down is 20%. It's really easy to tell. It's definitely like the advocacy groups are, taking responsibility for having organized to get these books banned. And then the other 30% may not be fully aligned, but they're using the same book lists, they're using the same language. So if there's not a direct correlation, there's definitely a huge influence. And so that's like a huge change over how things have been in the past. Usually a book challenge is because, it's like sometimes it's called organic book challenges where the book will come up because, a parent sees it and they don't think it's appropriate for the child. So they'll bring it to the school board or, a local patron at the library will bring up a book. So it's very unusual that the past, 2 years has been so aggressively attacked by these advocacy groups that have agendas. They're very well organized. They're very well funded. They often portray themselves as grassroots organizations. Some of them are, some of them aren't. And so that's a huge difference. And it's definitely a very conservative, like super conservative body that is challenging these books. It's often challenges to books that are about race or racism, and books by or about members from different LGBTQ plus communities are the major target of these bans. So that's really what most of the bans are. There's kind of like there are bans coming from the other side as well. I hate saying side because all this stuff is so nuanced. But that's like a huge portion of the bans are targeting those materials, but we're seeing bans in the education realm when it comes to at least comics history. There are people who object to folks like Will Eisner and R. Crumb, and some of the work is objectionable to folks, but it's like certain things, like it's really hard to discuss the history of comic books, like the history of the graphic novel, without talking about Will Eisner. It's hard to talk about the history of the underground comic scene and like zines without talking about R. Crumb. So some of that stuff has also been challenged over the last couple of years. And the really sort of like weird out of left field challenger is the algorithm. We're seeing a lot of, and this is, I guess, less to do with libraries, so I'll just keep it short, but it's a lot of artists and comics on different like sales platforms are getting takedowns that are, it's all moderated by algorithms. There's no real human behind it except for the humans programming the algorithms. And those are often influenced by international markets. So it's international laws that are more restrictive than United States laws are actually affecting our marketplace with algorithms. So.
Interesting, thank you. So why do you think this is happening now? Why is there such an explosion in the number of books being challenged and the type of books and the number of groups that are passing around book lists and challenging them at schools and libraries and elsewhere.
Yeah, we need some sociologists on the stat to figure out what's going on. I mean, I think a huge part of it has to be with the political climate. I mean, across the board, everyone is discussing about how polarized we are as a country right now. So it's that in combination with I think the pandemic and being isolated at home. There was, I mean, so many of these challenges have to do with schools and libraries. And, you know, this is the first time that so much of what is happening in schools was happening in the home, and it was happening in homes where, you know, parents were there, they were getting more involved. So I think there's a little bit more of that as well. So it's some sort of combination between, I think, the pandemic and then also just how polarized we are as a country. Yeah, I mean, we for Banned Books Week this week, you know, we have the slogan "Books Unite Us, Censorship Divides Us." And it's the same slogan that we had last year as well. And we decided to keep the same slogan because it's so important, and we're just seeing sort of the same thing ramping up, maybe even, you know, getting worse. It's like I thought I was being really clever coming up with this phrase, but I realized that I was actually misquoting Roger Ebert, the film critic. But it was basically, storytelling is like an empathy machine. And having a wide variety of books, outside of our own voices, just, it allows us to connect with each other. And censorship is stopping that from happening. It's stopping the empathy. It's stopping the growth of community. Yeah, I think that's what's really heartbreaking about book censorship, is that this is something that could help heal, and it's being torn apart.
Great, thank you. And where are these book challenges happening? Is there a specific region of the country? Is it everywhere? How about in Oregon? Where is this happening the most?
Yeah, it's happening all over the country. I was talking to folks who were maybe making assumptions about specific areas of the country, that it was just happening there. And I've been kind of creating an unofficial map when we get challenges, or when I see challenges in the newspaper. I've just been plugging them into a Google map, and it's all over. It's from, you know, Alaska to Florida, and Maine to Southern California, you know, Hawaii as well. But we're seeing challenges all across the country. It's specifically, I think, more dense in states like Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania. And these are states where, in addition to these advocacy groups that are trying to ban and censor books, they're also getting a lot of pressure from legislators as well. Texas in particular had, there's something that people have been calling the Krauss list, which is a list of like about 850 books that that people just needed to check to make sure those weren't in their libraries or schools, because those were bad books. And, you know, there wasn't really much behind the fact that this like legislator was saying that these are bad books. And we've been seeing that people have been using that list as a playlist. People have not been reading the books, but have been challenging the books on that list, because they're just taking it as, you know, like, oh, well, this is what I'll use. So, and then, you know, there's similar things, like Florida had the Parental Rights Act, which people have also been calling the Don't Say Gay Act. So, you know, things like divisive concepts can't be discussed in the classroom, which is, you know, leads to certain books being banned if they're from certain perspectives. I mean, that's not even to mention the fact that teachers can't talk about their own families. It's, you know, so we are seeing higher density in regions like that, and states like that. We're having, you know, additional pressure put on people. And with that additional pressure, it's also more likely that you'll see soft censorship bans, people deciding not to add things to their collection, or things silently going missing off the shelves, school boards not following their policies and removing books because this is unprecedented obscenity, even though they haven't actually read the books themselves and aren't sure what is in them. So yeah, and then you had brought up Oregon as well. There was one case like this past year in Medford that was really interesting because it involved The Handmaid's Tale, the graphic novel adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale. And what was really interesting about that case is that they decided to and eventually banned the graphic novel, but they didn't get rid of the novel itself. And that's something that I think speaks to the specific danger that comic books are under, and the power of visual media.
And in the Medford case, the district was very quick to point out, but it's okay. We're only removing the graphic novel. We're leaving the novel. They brought that up.
Yeah,
out of themselves.
Yeah, it's super frustrating that there's this disconnect between visual and just the printed word. And then there's also, we're seeing this pop up, like this popped up in the Virginia Beach case with genderqueer as well, that there is a view that graphic novels aren't real literature, or there's not much value to them, which seems like such an old mindset. Like we've moved past that. So it's pretty crazy that has been used as well as a tool to attack comic books and to ban books. It's like, oh, well, that's just the graphic novel version. So yeah, a similar thing happened with Kite Runner as well. A graphic novel adaptation of Kite Runner was removed, but the book itself was kept. Yeah.
Which is very surprising because we've been adding in my district many graphic novels to our official curriculum. So the entire class will read graphic novels. So clearly they have plenty of literary merit. And then also the graphic novel version can be an excellent way if there's also a novel for students to comprehend the book and access the book. If reading the original version is difficult or challenging.
Yeah, that's what's so cool about graphic novels, and is that you can get such complex ideas and make them much more accessible, and you can get a really complex idea and relate it quicker sometimes with a graphic novel. And something that we talk about a lot within the organization is how visual our world is becoming. There's so much social media, there's so much like Twitter and Facebook and TikTok and all that kind of stuff. And it's becoming more and more important that people have a visual literacy. And so that's not just looking at images, taking them for what they are. It's looking at images, looking at the text with the image, comparing the image with the text. Do they connect? Is there like dissonance between the two? What does that mean? And so it's becoming more and more important for people in school, in these learning settings, to have access to that type of material so they can be learning this visual literacy. And I mean, it's shown by a lot of these people who are challenging the comics don't perhaps have that visual literacy themselves. And that's why there's so much misreading of the material and misconstruing and, not taking it seriously. Yeah.
And I've seen a big shift in attitude in the past few years, just of teachers who might at one point have brought students to the library and said, hey, check out a real book, stay away from the graphic novels, to, hey, let's add some graphic novels to our curriculum. So I think that's changing for the better. But do you think the fact that groups can, for example, post an image to social media from a graphic novel, and that has more of an impact out of context than maybe a quotation?
Yeah, definitely. This huge influx of challenges started around 2 years ago, and it's almost like it started when someone realized that they could publish single panels out of context from genderqueer specifically, and it went viral. It went totally viral, and that's sort of what started a lot of these issues. Yeah, it's just like it blows my mind just how incorrect some of this material is. And I read a lot of news sources from all kinds of newspapers from all the spectrums, and all across the spectrum, newspapers are reporting, even newspapers themselves are reporting incorrectly on some of these books, on some of these challenges, sort of like taking the viral person's perspective instead of, engaging with material and being like, this is what's been alleged, blah, blah, blah. So you've just seen a lot of like misaging and misinformation, and it's not what's happening in the books, and it's not talking about the context of agency. And yeah, it's upsetting.
For sure, when people clearly have not read the book that they're challenging, it seems like the least you could do. Yeah, what are some of the reasons, specifically for graphic novels, that people cite? Is it mostly sexuality, or what are the things that they bring up over and over again as to why the book is not appropriate?
So the two like really big ones are, well, I'll say like the three really big ones. First one's like sexuality. Second one would be probably harmful to minors. And the third one would be divisive material. And that's often, speaking of or on racism, it's considered like divisive. There's that whole thing, like I almost don't want to say the acronym, but like there's accusations that it was CRT, which it was not, but kind of like fanning those flames. But the huge issue with the sexuality and harmful to minors is that there's a conflation of those harmful things with LGBTQ plus. And that's the huge issue, is that a community is automatically being sort of like put in this light and seen in this way. And so that's why it's so important that people who are challenging the books are reading the books. So one of the books that's like challenged the most, it was in years past, it's been like up there on the top 10 most challenged books, is a graphic novel called Drama by Raina Telgemeier. And when I first saw that graphic novel was challenged, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna read this. And I read it, and it's like, I must have missed something, because this has been thrown out for being harmful to minors, for being, sexually deviant, like all these issues. Since I read it again, I was like, I have no idea why this is challenged and being banned. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And so I had to like go and find specifics and like ask my coworkers, like, what's going on? And it's because it just has like a same-sex kiss in it. And it's so like, the story of the graphic novel is so sweet. It's like high school kids putting on a theatrical production. And it's just like the sweetest, most wonderful graphic novel. And it's being put in this like terrible light because there are people who have agendas where they're against people from those communities, the LGBTQ plus communities. And this is one of those books that will be on these lists that are going around, and it's just being removed without any review, and because it's just being considered, oh, well, this is explicit, this is harmful to minors, yada, yada, yada.
One that really surprised me was New Kid.
Oh, yeah.
The author himself, such a sweet book about a boy going to a new school and experiencing racism and discrimination, but that's certainly not the core of it. And I think Jerry Craft, the author himself, had to Google it to find out, like, why is this being targeted? And I suppose that's suggesting that racism is still a problem. might be the reason.
There's like,
Yes.
speaking of like comics literacy and visual literacy, is there was one of the huge things that was criticizing that book was, accusing it of pushing CRT ideology. And the screenshot that they used was of a page that was poking fun at the people who were being overly sensitive about race in school. So it was like, you don't even understand that you're showing that it's, showing both sides of the situation. And I mean, that was like such a bright light on the fact that people aren't understanding what they're challenging and the issues.
And then my final question, and the audience may have some questions, or I'm sure we have many more things we haven't talked about, but what can community members do? If a book is being challenged in your school or public library, how can you support intellectual freedom? Or even if it's not, in a broader sense, what can we do about this?
So I think one of the most important things to do is to report censorship. So graphic novels, you can report to the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. If you go to our main page, we have like a button in the top right corner, report censorship. It's also a way to not only report the censorship, but request help if you would like help defending the book. And then there are also organizations like ALA, American Library Association, their Office of Intellectual Freedom tracks challenges. So reporting the censorship to them, and then also reporting censorship to National Coalition Against Censorship. So those are all ways that you can report the censorship. There's also, it's the people who are going after books right now are very well organized. And so we as a community, if we want to see the books stay, we also need to get organized. We need to go to meetings if we have the time. This is, of course, if you have the time, but going to your board meetings, if something is challenged, going to library meetings, if you have the time, running for your school board, so you can be sure that you have good policies in place and that nothing is being, removed without a fair assessment. Joining your library board, if that's possible for you. Also, like joining organizations, like the various support organizations of libraries, like Friends of, such and such library, getting involved in those ways. And reading everything. So you yourself can talk about it and talk about your experience. If you have, kids in your lives, sharing it with them as well, so those are some of the ways. And then also sometimes when there's big challenges, reaching out for help from a larger organization may be the only way to go. Like if it does lead to needing to go to court, you're going to definitely want to reach out to a larger organization because, it's like the fees, it makes it prohibitive. So reaching out to larger organizations to support you in that way as well is something to think about.
Absolutely. And we do ask people to report on to the state of Oregon. We have a intellectual freedom page where we want to hear about any challenges or situations and can provide support. But I think one thing that I worry even more about than the challenges is the idea that as librarians we might be now too careful about what we we're censoring ourselves in our collections because we're worried about the controversy and about being attacked personally on social media, etc. So which is really scary.
It's hard too. Like there was that case in Lana where the librarian was fired because she refused to remove the books from the shelves. And that is super awesome. And she's a hero, but that's not viable for every single person to put their job on the line. So yeah, I can't imagine. There's I was like really heartened to see a news article a couple weeks ago about a librarian in Louisiana who was pressing charges because she was being harassed. Um, and I brought up another, I think, really good point, is that one of the ways in which they were harassing the librarian was by calling them a groomer, which is another way that librarians are being attacked, is being called these, all these names, like defaming them. But it's especially dangerous because like groomer has a specific meaning, like what it means. And by sort of diluting the meaning of it and attacking other people with this word, you're actually endangering, in my opinion, you're endangering more people by kind of like drawing the attention away from that and into, attacking these librarians. Yeah.
I loved what you said about reading. We can all read the books that are being challenged so that we can see why those, say, a certain image is in there and how it fits into the story and how important it is. I was on a panel recently it was great to hear from the librarians on the panel, but hearing from our students talking about books like The Hate You Give or Between the World and Me and how much it meant to them was really powerful. So I think we don't talk to our students or hear their voices enough in terms of what does this mean to you and why do you need access to it.
Something that I didn't mention earlier for how people can help that you just reminded me of was book clubs, right? It's been so cool. Like a lot of the areas where books have been retained have had huge student backing, which has been really, I think, a success in a lot of the districts where books are being challenged. And a lot of those students have also started like banned book clubs, and they're meeting in their local libraries if they, necessarily can't meet at their schools. And that's another way to support, free speech and access and intellectual freedom is these book clubs and helping the book clubs form and whatnot.
Well, great. Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? We'd love to answer some. Nothing at the moment.
There's not been anything in chat, and if you do have questions, please feel free to speak out, or if you want to send it to me in chat and I can read it for you if you need some anonymity, that's fine too.
Jordan, this is Carrie Light. I'm in Lake Oswego, and I have a question. Do you have any literature or anything promotional that you have available to the public about your cause, or what's?
Yeah, definitely. We, if you go to our website, cebldf.org, we have several resources there. The resources include like how to start a book club, adding graphic novels to your library. And that basically breaks down like different graphic novels, and it kind of brings together like positive reviews, any awards it's won. Something that we're starting to do is also add the language from reports when a book has been retained by a board. So we can include some of that, so you can use that when you're defending books. So we have some resources on there to help you with defending books as well. The website also has like news articles, a little bit of like history of comics comes up on the news feed every once in a while. Yeah, and then also if you go to bandbooksweek.org/resources, there's some great resources up there as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, y'all.
Hi.
I'm curious as to, and the hopeful person in me is thinking about the Streisand effect and how the publicizing of these banned books is drawing and raising the profile of these books. I'm wondering if your organization has done any like specific studies, or if that's something that you all do, or if just maybe anecdotally what you've noticed about that, or Yeah, just like
Yeah.
if you've had experience with that, what have you noticed?
Yeah, I don't have, I wish I had an answer. With something that we've definitely internally talked about is, it's making it easy, because we're like, if this is what can be used, it's not very clear. So that actually that Penn report, I'd say definitely check out the Penn America report that came out on Monday. Let me see if I can find a link to it real quick. But
Yeah,
basically that,
I showed that to my 7th graders today,
okay,
or
awesome.
this week in class. So yeah, they were really interested in seeing that.
Yeah, so here I have to look. I'm going to drop it in the chat real quick for other folks. So one of the things that they do mention in that is there have been, studies like, hey, these are 10 great books to be recommending to students who want to learn more about like LGBTQ plus, issues, and that's being pulled and being used as books that are being attacked. So I don't know, like just personally, I think the thing to do is to make sure that we have good policies in place. And that's a good way to, I mean, it's nonpartisan, so you should be able to get everyone behind you to have good policies. I know some of the studies that they've done have shown that people on both sides of the spectrum, like all across the spectrum, largely are not in favor of censorship. It's a smaller minority that's really pushing hard for the censorship. So that might be the way, but yeah, I wish I had an answer.
I think that comes up for librarians when we're putting up displays for Banned Books Week. It's like, ooh, if I put these out there with a sign about why they're being censored, am I going to get challenges? But that hasn't happened to me so far, so far so good. It does start a conversation, so I think it's helpful to put out, even especially the books that are currently being challenged, because sometimes we tend to display, something from a list from the 1950s of banned books, which is much less relevant, right? You see like the classics on display of like, these are banned books, but they're not the ones under attack right now.
Fahrenheit 451 does seem to be pretty safe right now. The Streisand effect that was mentioned, and this might, there is the idea that when a book has some notoriety, maybe it gets more people buying it. And I heard an author talk about how Mouse, when that was challenged, this really helped the author. A lot more copies were purchased. But the thing is this the author that was talking is name completely gone from my head. She's Muslim, and she wrote some children's books, including one about a little boy cooking lentils, and then at the end of the book eating the lentils with his friends. And this book was being challenged, and it was one of those where it's lentils. And the thing is that she thought, well, is this going to help sales? And no, it did not. She didn't have the level of fame, and it was keeping her book away from people who just might want to read it. And it went further in that you had bookstores that were not exactly placing it. Wasn't, they're not necessarily being put with kids' books, but it's under Islamic studies and reference, and then the book doesn't sell, oddly enough, and they send it back. And so it's not so much censorship there as just, you want to say common sense, that it's not that people who are interested in buying books for kids may be interested in this book, but they're not going to go to the Islamic studies section because they want to find children's books. And we don't tend to have that same problem in libraries, but you can. If you decide that you're going to, genre books get placed, if you have genres separated, maybe you say, oh, we're going to have this in religious studies, even though the book is about cooking lentils.
There's proposals not to take the book out of the library, but would you please shelve it in a restricted section or move it to the adult section where it won't be found as readily.
Yeah.
So there are other ways to censor rather than just remove the book. The other thing I wanted to point out was 99% of the time when someone has had a concern about a book, at least in the past before it was organized groups, just having a conversation and listening and talking with them about it and explaining how the library works, and that their student doesn't have to read that, we can find other things, would take care of the issue and they would go away satisfied. And so only a very, very small percentage in the past have gone forward to be a formal challenge.
It's 10 till. I know that we only have Jordan until the top of the hour. So if people, and I know Jordan did say that if people had questions and he had already left, he would be happy to reach out through email. And so I'm happy to take questions and forward them on to him and then send them back out to people who attended. But does anyone have anything that they'd like to bring up, or an anecdote, question, anecdote, whatever?
Question in the chat.
Nope.
So yeah, I see this. So is CBLDF involved with the censorship in Bonners Ferry, Idaho? So since we do legal work, I'm not always allowed to discuss things that we're currently involved with, and I'm also not privy to everything that we're involved with. Some of the stuff I am able to be in on the case. So I'm not sure about Idaho.
Well, okay, we can wrap up a few minutes early. That's not a problem. Thank you all so much. And a special thanks to Miranda and Jordan. This has been a great session. And as Miranda pointed out, we're not, the celebration is not yay banned books, but yay intellectual freedom. And so we certainly hope that all the people on this session are going to be doing what they can to be advocates for intellectual freedom. But thank you all so much, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.